The Soviet Union built one of the most powerful economies the world had ever seen, not through markets, but through control. Factories rose from empty land. Steel, tanks, and rockets poured out of planned production lines. A nation once rural became an industrial giant in just decades. But behind this power stood a fragile system, a system where numbers mattered more than needs, where quotas replaced reality, and where control came at a cost. This is the story of the Soviet economy, its rise, its strength, and its collapse. Have you ever wondered how a massive country like the Soviet Union could transform from a largely agrarian society into an industrial superpower in just a few decades? The secret lies in a radical economic experiment. The 5-year plans. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, faced a monumental task. They inherited a nation shattered by war and civil unrest. Their ideology was clear. Capitalism, with its private ownership and market chaos, had failed. The future, they believed, was in a planned, socialist economy where the state controlled the means of production for the benefit of all. This wasn't just an economic shift. It was a deeply ideological one. The goal was to build a new society, free from the exploitation they saw in the West. Their first attempt, war communism, was a drastic measure for wartime. But for long-term growth, they needed a more structured approach. This led to the new economic policy, a temporary step back that allowed some private enterprise to stabilize the economy. But the real revolution began in 1928 with Joseph Stalin and the launch of the first 5-year plan. The ambition was staggering. The plan set incredibly high quotas for heavy industry: coal, iron, steel, and electricity. The idea was that by building a powerful industrial base first, everything else, consumer goods, agriculture, a higher standard of living would follow. A wave of revolutionary fervor swept the nation. Propaganda posters depicted heroic workers forging a new world. People volunteered for massive construction projects, working in harsh conditions, driven by the belief they were building a socialist utopia. They were told they were catching up to and surpassing the capitalist West. The air was thick with optimism and a sense of collective purpose. However, the reality was incredibly difficult. The targets were often unrealistic, leading to immense pressure on managers and workers. Resources were scarce, and expertise was limited. The drive for rapid industrialization came at a huge human cost, especially in the countryside, where forced collectivization of agriculture led to famine and widespread suffering as resources were funneled into the cities and factories. Despite the immense challenges and brutal methods, the results were, in some ways, dramatic. The Soviet Union did industrialize at a breakneck pace. New cities, massive factories, and hydroelectric dams sprang up across the landscape. By the end of the 1930s, the USSR had become a major industrial power, a transformation that would prove critical in the coming Second World War. The early 5-year plans were a story of grand ambition, ideological conviction, and immense sacrifice. They laid the foundation for the Soviet superpower, but also left a legacy of brutality and hardship. It's a complex and fascinating chapter of history that shows what can happen when a nation commits everything to a single, radical vision of the future. Part 1. The idea of CIONT, a role after. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The Soviet leadership rejected capitalism. Private property was abolished. The state took control of land, factories, and production. The goal was simple: build a society without inequality. Instead of markets deciding what to produce, the government created central plans. These were called 5-year plans. Every factory, farm, and industry received strict production targets: steel, coal, wheat, machinery. Everything was calculated. In theory, this created order. In practice, it created pressure. Part 2. Industrial. POWEORTH. Early plans focused on heavy industry. Massive factories appeared across the Soviet Union. Cities like Magnitogorsk were built from nothing. By the 1940s, the USSR had become one of the world's largest industrial producers. This power played a decisive role during World War II. Soviet factories produced tanks, weapons, and equipment at enormous scale. The system worked, but only in one direction: production over people. Consumer goods were scarce. Everyday life was difficult. Long lines, shortages, and limited choice became normal. Part 3. The cost of central PLIN and ING's central planning had one fatal weakness. Information. Officials in Moscow decided how much bread, steel, or shoes the entire country needed. But reality is complex, and numbers on paper rarely matched real life. Factories often lied about production to meet quotas. A shoe factory might produce thousands of pairs, but all in the wrong size. A nail factory might produce nails too large to use, simply because weight targets mattered more than usefulness. The system rewarded numbers, not quality. And when mistakes happened, there was no market to correct them. Part 4. Agriculture and failure. Agriculture became one of the Soviet economy's greatest struggles. Private farms were replaced with collective farms controlled by the state. Farmers lost ownership. Motivation dropped. Productivity fell. In some periods, food shortages became severe. The Soviet Union, despite vast land, sometimes had to import grain from abroad. For a superpower, this was a warning sign. Part 5. The Cold War. ECO. ONMY. During the Cold War, the Soviet economy focused heavily on military and space competition. Missiles, nuclear weapons, and the space race demanded enormous resources. The USSR achieved historic milestones, including launching the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. But military strength came at a cost. Money that could improve housing, food supply, and consumer life went into defense. People waited years for cars. Apartments were small. Stores were often empty. The system remained powerful, but rigid. Part 6. Stagnation. Yoanba. The 1970s and 80s. Growth slowed. Innovation declined. Technology lagged behind the West. Factories kept producing, but inefficiently. Corruption spread quietly. Black markets appeared. The system still looked strong from the outside. Inside it was losing momentum. Part 7. Reform and CL. In the 1980s, leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms. Perestroika. Economic restructuring. Glasnost, openness, and transparency. The intention was to fix the system. But reforms exposed deeper problems. Production fell. Shortages increased. Public trust weakened. By 1991, the Soviet economy, once a symbol of centralized power, collapsed along with the Soviet Union itself. Part 8. What really failed? The Soviet economy did not collapse overnight. It weakened slowly, under rigid control, lack of flexibility, and disconnect from real needs. Central planning created strength in heavy industry, but weakness in adaptation. A system built on controls struggled to survive in a changing world. CONCLUSION. The Soviet economy proved that power can be built through organization, discipline, and planning. But it also showed a deeper truth. An economy is not only numbers and production. It is people, choice, and balance. When control replaces reality, even the strongest system can fall. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history.